But this is one of the strategy that Putin is after. He wants to keep Trump and the United States, more specifically, away from Europe. The same way that, and this is what the US is trying to accomplish here, the same way they want to keep Russia away from China. This is very important for you to understand. Well, how is he doing that? Did he win on that point? Well, the thing is, he's talking to him at least, so that's good, but doesn't mean he's away from Russia, from China. But at the very least, he is able to get his attention. And more importantly, the only reason Russia is going to get closer and closer to China is the weaker and the weaker it gets, right? They're not weak right now. And the more Russia fights this war, obviously, it's basically a war economy. You are weakening yourself. You can't be at war forever. So this is not a good thing for Russia. So what the U.S. is trying to do, James is saying that I hope Trump ends the war. Well, unfortunately, the U.S. is not, yes it is. The U.S., I want to make everybody wealthy again, you know what I'm saying? So I'm going to try to share with you some insight that I've had. The thing is, it is not possible. They want to keep Russia healthy, because the healthier it is, the further away it is from China. Don't forget, my friends, don't forget that Russia and China, the reason I'm going over this is because Russia and China have had quite a few agreements put together. In May of this year, they have had a deepening strategic partnership. China and Putin basically signed a joint statement, whatever that means, but it's of deepening the comprehensive strategic partnership. Key elements: boost use of national currencies, right? Think dollar. Expand economic and political financial cooperation, and oppose unilateral sanction and uphold the UN primacy in global governance. The point is, let's get together. Then they have operationalizing collaboration. They have almost 20 plus agreements. At the May 2025 summit, they both exchanged over 20 documents across diverse domains. What do you think the U.S. is in Alaska right now? It is not really about Ukraine. They know all this. 20 documents signed between China and Russia across diverse domains: energy, finance, legal system, biosecurity, culture. This marks a shift from symbolic solidarity toward functional integration. Look at it in sectors critical to countering Western influence. That is what it's about. And that is what you need to understand. Why? Well, because if they're getting together and the U.S. is over there, well, big deal. What do we need them for? No. The U.S. needs China for lots and lots of things. Most of, if not 100%, I think it's 90-something plus percent of antibiotics come from China. So if you're the U.S. president, right? Well, obviously, let's make the antibiotics here. Well, that's a different topic, okay? Let's make it here. Okay, but that's a different topic. But more importantly, you don't want these guys to get stronger and stronger. Not for long. We'll see, right? Professor Oak, how you doing? Always welcome to join the conversation. So basically, what we are going to say is that, there's a lot of agreement between China. This is not something made up. There's also a future lunar nuclear power. There's a memorandum of cooperation. I mean, they haven't started anything, but for a nuclear power station on the moon was agreed, designed to power the lunar station. Then there's a legal and normative alignment of international law, meaning these people, and this is made, so they're all getting together. They're talking. They're agreeing, right? So what do you think is going to happen? That is the reason all these people are there. And we need to analyze, okay, why do we need so many people? I thought everybody talks about the president and Putin, and the Putin and the president. Where's the president? What does the president say? What he's going to say? He's warning him. He's doing this, doing that. Don't listen to any of that, because it is more complicated than this. What they're doing, they are very concerned that they might lose Russia. Hey, they probably already lost India, quite frankly. right? Why? Well, because India is also going to meet with China at the end of the year, and India is going to meet with Ukraine, with Russia. Listen, the U.S. is slowly, so never mind the fact that the clock is ticking from an industrial point of view, that it's not really producing anything anymore of to protect itself and to feel itself, and but it is also losing track of its interests. Let's put it this way. I want to say enemies, but interest with Russia and China and India. So that's what they're trying to do, okay? So this has nothing to do with Ukraine. Well, obviously they're going to talk about Ukraine. Obviously they're going to say, well, can we stop fighting? And because the more the fight, the weaker you get. And the weaker you get, the closer you get to these guys. So therefore, I don't want, let's find a way. Now, of course, if there is no way, because, Ukraine basically says, I want everything back. I want you out, right? And I want some reparation, and I want to get closer to NATO. All these things that we all know that Putin is never going to agree. Is he going to go home with his head between his legs? That's not going to happen. So therefore, the odds of that are very small. Right? So if you're the president, what do? How do you get out of this situation? Keep your friends close, but your enemy closer. But don't weaken it so much that he's going to go to the other larger enemy. Then you have two enemies to fight. So what do? Fight, I'm not talking about fighting. I'm talking about economic fight, which is that's what it impacts you. So what do? Well, I mean, basically, we're going to offer the land, and the land is not going to go anywhere, obviously. And then he's going to say, well, listen, guys, I'm out of here. I'm not, because don't forget, and this is the mega aspects that comes in. Besides this, and that's behind the JD presence. As you see, the vice president is there. He's not just showing up just to see what's going on. There's a very political reason why you would have the vice president with you. And we'll talk about Rubio after. But the point is, by having the vice president, it brings a different aspect. So essentially, what the president's going to have to do is basically say, you know what? No more weapons. I don't want to feed this war anymore. And of course, if I stop feeding the war, the European won't be able to keep it up. And then the war will just stop where it is. Unless Putin decides to, well, let me take the whole thing then. I don't think so. But we'll see. But then you're out of this. The war stops. You please your MAGA people. So why am I bringing up the MAGA people? Well, let's talk about J.D. Vance, the vice president. What is he doing there? Well, when Vice President Vance appeared at a high-stake U.S.-Russia summit, it sends a packed signal, very strong signal. Trump is giving Russia access to Alaska resources. Well, we shall see. We haven't agreed on anything yet. But obviously, Professor Oak has an interesting point. They're there also to make some sort of agreement. Let's start to do business. Because at the end, the more business you do with me, the less you do with China, right? So I could be helpful to you in many ways. So they have to, it's not just about Ukraine. And we'll see. You'll see it after. In fact, there was an article very recently in the Financial Times talking about economic. Now more when they're talking, you hear more about the economic aspects of things. Not just the Ukraine and Putin is going to take advantage of him and all these. This is just for public consumptions, to feed your anger or your pleasure one way or the other. But that's not how things are done in the real world that they're living. Okay, don't forget, these people have no friends or enemy. They just have interests. So having J.D. Vance, right, it sends a packed signal, both domestically and internationally. Why? Because it's symbols of administration priorities. Although President Trump is the central figure in the summit, Vance's involvement underscored the meeting's full administration endorsement. It's not just him. Don't forget, JD probably wants to be president one day. JD knows what the MAGA people don't want. It's not just a personal initiative. That's what it means. That's why you have all these people. His presence hints at a strategy centered on domestically, politically alignment and deal-making posture over traditional diplomacy. And I know a lot is being made of the fact that, well, Trump is acts on the moment, right? He's a negotiator on the moment, doesn't think too much about preparing. He's unpredictable, so that's good, right? And then the Putin aspect is the guy's really thinking a long term, and it's tough to deal with Trump because, frankly, we don't know what he's going to do, say. So basically, what's happening is it's not about that. They're not negotiating over a bike. They're negotiating about lots of things. They are talking about what's going to happen in the future. Okay. So second, and this is what's important, it reinforced skepticism towards Ukraine. Vance has been consistent critic of U.S. aid to Ukraine. The way you read this is basically Vance wants to make sure that the MAGA people are taken care of and are not forgotten. He's publicly argued for a freeze of the conflict, quote unquote, supporting territory concession and neutrality for Kiev instead of full restoration. He's saying just give him what he has. And don't forget, Putin, Russia, has 20% of Ukraine right now, and it's holding on to it. Okay. His presence at the summit signals that the administration is likely positioning Vance's view. They're sending a signal. They're saying, listen, Putin is not going back home with nothing. He's going to keep something if anything is being agreed or discussed, or, you know what I mean? So something is going to have to happen. That's a doozy. So basically, symbol of it, administration priorities, reinforces the skepticism towards Ukraine. Then European allies are not comforted. Do you remember the last time J.D. Vance went to Europe? He basically told them, listen, guys, you're on your own. European leaders were already uneasy about Vance. And Vance is a very sharp guy. Do not underestimate him. They met with him in the UK ahead of the summit to insist Europe would continue supporting Ukraine independently and to ensure they weren't sidelined by an overly crazy approach to Putin. You know what? You want to get involved, then go right ahead. You're going to weaken yourself fighting a war that, frankly, you're not going to be able to support. You cannot support this war without the U.S. It's not possible. They need the U.S. Vance's attendance without seasoned diplomats may be viewed as a downgrade in traditional foreign policy. Now, of course, you've heard a lot. My God, so they're not going with any kind of Russian quote-unquote experts? What are they doing? They're going to get their lunch eaten. Don't believe that for 1 second. They're reinforcing concern over de-emphasizing alliances. Exactly. Because they know in the White House that they got bigger fish to fries. Not for Monday morning, but over the next 5 to 7 years, which is exactly Rubio. And we'll talk about Rubio. If Rubio or if JD, right, they want to become president, that's just going to be smack in the middle of it. What does that mean? Being president? Well, they're going to inherit this thing. And this mess, well, let's not call it a mess because the market is great, economy is great, inflation, quote unquote, under control so far, interests are going to be low, the Fed doesn't look like it's going to be an issue going forward. So it looks like they've got everything more or less under control. And frankly, we may not see this inflation everybody's looking at. We shall see. But it looks like it's under control. Let's see if it is. But so far, the economists have been wrong. Anyway, we'll see. But the point is that if he's going to become president, he wants to make sure that at least he's got cause on his side so that he could be reelected, quite frankly. That's what they're looking forward. These people are playing chess. They're not playing checkers. They're thinking, if I do this is what's going to happen, and he's going to do this, and this is what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, this is where I end up. What does it mean? It means essentially that he wants to make sure, because right now, my friends, and this is why I want you to subscribe to this channel so you have a feel and understanding what's happening around you, is the fact that the U.S. is on a ticking clock. Apart from the administration rhetoric that we need to make America great again and all that, you need to understand that there is a weakening of the industrial base. Well, that's good because it's only 20% of the U.S. economy and 80% is services, which is, we have a trade surplus with the world, which is fantastic. The thing is, do you really want to depend on all these other people for your medicine, your semiconductors, everything having to do rare earth minerals, all these things? Are you sure? As long as you trust them, it's no problem. It's supposed tomorrow they get together, they close the door and say, that's it, we're throwing in the keys. You know what? We're not, because that's what's happening right now with rare earth minerals. I mean, that level has dropped by 50%, and you need rare earth minerals to build weapons, phone, and all that. And they already said, you know what, 50%. We're not going to send you as much as we... In fact, some of the defense companies have a big problem right now because they can't get the stuff to make the weapons. And it's not... When you say rare earth mineral, it feels like it's rare. No, it's not so much that it's rare. It's all over, but you have to learn how to dig and go and get it. And the only one that has been spending time to learn how to do it has been China. So number 4 of J.D. Vance being there, it's politics over policy. Vance's political profile, I mean, you know his story, right? He comes from a rough background. Very smart guy and very everything else, but it's a rough background. Ideological, politically confrontational, and not foreign policy focused. I don't have to remind you what happened when he was in the White House and he almost kicked out Zelensky because he weren't wearing a suit and he was disrespectful. This is a very important concept for MAGA. He was disrespectful of the president by showing up with the black thing, without a tie, without anything. And it's all about respect. It's all about Fortress America. It's all about, So that's what he's there for. It reflects the administration preference for political loyalty over domain expertise. Well, at the end of the day, if you're going to negotiate with someone, you want to make sure you negotiate people are going to turn on you. Because that's what happened in the first administration with Trump, right? He had these Bolton and all these people, the guy, the communication guy, funny name, forget his name, but the point is going around always complaining. But obviously you can't, you may agree or may not agree with the guy. The point is that if you have a bunch of people that don't agree with you, that's not going to be helpful. But this time he's only has people that are fully 100% behind him. And the fact that you have Rubio there, which actually, little Rubio, little Marco, remember? That the fact that, Lincoln did that. I don't know if you read the book about Lincoln, that on his cabinet, he had people that really didn't agree with him. He had a bunch of different people for the benefits of all. Right? Not Benzo Brothers. What's that book that he wrote about? Somebody could remind me. That'd be great. The fact that Lincoln had a bunch of people that didn't agree with him, and yet they were part of his. And Rubio at some point didn't agree with Trump, and look at him now. So you need to get the people not so much that like you, but people that could work with you. That is very important. So basically 4 points for JD being there. Symbol of an administration priorities, reinforcing skepticism towards Ukraine. So this is not a done deal for Ukraine. That doesn't look good for Ukraine. A European ally is not comforted. That's what he's there for. That's what they're sending the signals. And politics over policy. Because at the end of the day, they know very well that they're not going to change Putin's mind. Remember, Putin wants one thing. He wants to make Russia great again. And he has said it many times that the worst day for him is when Russia collapsed, USSR. So overall, J.D. Vance's inclusion in the Trump-Putin summit isn't a diplomatic afterthought. It is a deliberate political signal. You need to read that. Why? This is important. Goes beyond Ukraine. They got to make sure they keep this guy close, Putin. It confirmed that this meeting intends to reshape the narrative around the Ukraine war according to Vince's realist, deal-first viewpoint rather than traditional alliance and diplomatic approach. Meaning, listen, let's be realistic here. What can be approached? What can be done? What can be achieved with Ukraine? That's going to be very difficult. So, what about Rubio? He's there too. And don't forget, Rubio's got 2 jobs and they never replaced the other job, the person that left. Anyway, Marcus Rubio's presence at the Trump-Putin summit is significant and carries considerable strategic taking care of business. The thing is, they're taking care of business. The question is going to be, is this the right approach always? By that, I mean that, okay, fine. So what are you doing? Well, my country is, I'm losing, the ability to make very important things that we need for security and health purposes. So we're going to try to bring the business back in the U.S. Okay. And how are you doing that? Well, I'm using the tariffs. And how is that working? Well, it's working pretty well because we're collecting money. Great. We don't have any inflation. Great. And we're getting investment. Great. Anything bad? Well, in the process of doing that, we are upsetting a lot of people. We are upsetting India, which frankly, we're trying to keep them closer, but they're not talking to us anymore. Or at least they're very upset about the 50%, and I did a live on that. India, is that the way to keep your friends close? You're making them going closer, get them closer to China by doing that. Europe, they're still talking, but they're very upset right now because now they have to spend 5% of their GDP on defense where they used to spend 1%. But in this case, and this is why they sell a lot of newspapers and sell lots of views, because you can't get it all right. You're going to get some right things. So the people that like you are going to say, look, all the great thing that he's doing. And the people that don't like you, they're going to say, look, he's upsetting everyone. And we're going to have inflation. And Putin's going to take advantage of him. Yeah, that's right. No. You always have to be in the middle. You need to look at both. Because otherwise, you're just a peon, right? You're just following Because don't forget, this has huge implication for you, right? If you have money in the stock market, right now, the market is extremely highly valued, very expensive. So what does that mean? Well, I mean, if this thing drags on for too long and Putin starts to get weaker and he gets closer and closer to the other guy, to China, that's not going to be good. You're going to lose ground. You're going to lose more and more ground. And then they're going to get closer. At some point, they're going to close the door. Not that it's not a, well, we'll talk about a potential war, but what's happening right now is definitely economic. China is rushing. What is the future of India after the 50% tariff, says Russia? Well, I'll tell you, that 50% tariff is going to decrease, is going to impact the GDP of, although it hasn't technically been, I don't believe it has been technically initiated yet, right? But it is official and it's happening very soon. I think he's kind of putting the pressure on. But the point is, if you are, and frankly, India makes a lot of stuff for the US. You know, pharmaceutical is one thing, but more than that, they do a lot of stuff for the US. Okay. And the US trade, that 50% tariff on India, frankly, is going to have a lasting growth headwind, with the biggest hits to export heavy sector like textile, gem, jewelry, apparel. So all these people right now, they're saying, okay, well, all right, so 50%, even though they're not going to pay, you know, the company doesn't pay or the India doesn't pay the 50%. But what happens is no one is going to order your product if it's a 50% markup. You do not make any money like that. You don't make money by selling at that kind of price. So what you're going to do is you have to move out, meaning that the Indian makers of textile, gem, jewelry, apparel, and engineering goods, they're going to move out of India and try to, you know, go to other countries to try to sell it. What it likely does to India over the next, I would say, 12 months, you lose at least 0.5 percentage points on your GDP, which is not insignificant. India's central bank has 6.5%, but they're probably going to, you're going to know you have a problem in India when they lower the rate, the interest rate in India, the central bank. They haven't done it yet because they say, come on, you're not serious 50%, right? But if you see it being dropped, then you know that the economy is going to slow down, and therefore the government in India needs to help the Indian businesses. Key sectors are going to be hit. Don't forget, the US buys 18% of India's merchandise export. 18%, that's gone. Textile, gem, jewelry are the most exposed. The US is the largest market for Indian jewelry. That's 10 billion, 30% of global sales. That is disastrous at the end of the day. You don't hear it, but if you're in India, pharma and foam have been flagged as relatively less targeted. Obviously, the US need those products, so they're not going to tax that. But in the process of replacing this as well, there's going to be pressure on jobs, on the export belt. Market and currency effect are going to be impacted. Over the next 12 to 13 months, we're talking trade diversion, right? I mean, because that's a problem, though, right? By doing this, then you're forcing them to pivot to alternative markets, West Asia, Africa, but that's not the US. And replacing US demand, but that scale is very difficult and slow. It's going to take years before you replace the US. But be careful. And that's the danger, right? By being so, you know, to coerce people into do what I want you to do. Well, then if you do that, then you say, you know what, I'm going to do business somewhere else. Go ahead. Who's going to buy your products? I'm 25% of the entire world. You're going to sell to Africa? They're not going to pay that much. But then again, I say, well, I have no choice. I can't sell this stuff. I got to sell at some price. I got to do something. That is the problem. You're welcome. So that's going to be, so the impact is sizable. And they're wondering, well, why isn't Modi moving? Well, he's not moving because he's got to be, don't forget, you know, we're picking on the US, but India has a lot of tariffs on the US, okay? India has a lot of tariff of, I think the India tariff on US is 17% overall, 39% agricultural goods. That's right. If you want to send your barley or your wheat or whatever to India, you have to pay 39% tariffs. And if it's non-agricultural, it's 13.5%. So that's a lot. So lots of damage there over the long term. So the point is that the way you deal with Modi? Why he's not budging? Because at the end of the day, again, with the thing with India, they're not doing that because they want India to stop buying oil from Russia. That's what you hear, but that's not the real reason. Why? It's 30% of their oil production. They are not going to say no to 30% of your total oil consumption at a discount. But the U.S. has been trying for a long time and they haven't gone anywhere. They want to get after that agricultural sector. Buy stuff from us. I can't. I got to keep my farmers. And Modi is basically, obviously he wants to be reelected. The farming community is huge in India. They want to keep it. So imagine all the things that are going on right now in the head of these people in Russia. By the way, starts at 3 o'clock today, Eastern Standard Time, in exactly 5 hours, 5.5 hours. So what about Marco Rubio? Well, Marco Rubio is there, right, because to balance between political and diplomatic forces. He's going to be there to say, okay, so he's got JD over here and he's got the president over there. And he's kind of the guy in the middle. That's why his likelihood to be the next president. Don't underestimate him. Because obviously you do not, anybody of you that has been to a corporate meeting, you don't want to go in a meeting that doesn't do well because everybody who was there is going to be blamed for it, right? So if he's there, they got to get something out of this. So later on, when he's applying to become president, he's going to say, look, I was there and this is what happened, this is what we did, and look how well it turned out, blah. So it's not just about these two guys. So basically, 4 reasons why Marco Rubio's presence is important. First, it elevates status. You have a Secretary of State at the meeting. As of now, Marco Rubio, believe it or not, he serves as U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. His inclusion at the delegation basically sends a clear message. This is not just a presidential meeting, even though the press, as you've seen, because that's what they get you going, right? Trump versus Putin versus Trump said this, Putin said that, really. Now, this is an official executive level diplomatic engagement. This is important. This gets recorded, it gets monitored, and it allows them to decide whether or not it makes sense or not. Because if it doesn't make sense, it's not going to work. Number 2, out of 4, balance between political and diplomatic forces. Trump's delegation notably lacked traditional diplomats. Where are the diplomats? Except for Rubio is the only guy, and for some reason, and I'm sure there's going to be a reason. I don't know what that means, but why Putin gonna croak? I have you. Yeah. So basically, what we have is the fact that there's 4 reasons why Marco Rubio's presence is significant. Elevating the status, balance between political and diplomatic forces. Balance between political and diplomatic forces. Trump's delegation notably lacked traditional diplomat. The reason this channel is doing very well, I will tell you the reason why, because somebody brought up this question, is because there is a need for actual, not news, because you get that, but actual analysis as to what the heck is really going on. What are they really thinking? What are they doing? Right? Because it impacts you. He needs to say why. Well, China is charging tariffs the same way the U.S. is charging tariffs. They're trying to protect and grow their own economy, except that not everybody can do the same thing at the same time, right? Because Modi is trying to protect the Indian farmers. That's why you say 39% tariffs, and the U.S. say, I want some of that. Give me some of that. No. Okay. Can I get the other stuff? That's 13%. Okay. And you're buying oil from Russia. What do you want from me? Right? 50%. But you have to think carefully. And on top of that, don't forget that Modi is going to meet China at the end of the year. In September, very soon. He's meeting China on a very big meeting. So I talked about it in my previous live, but you see what I mean? You got to be careful. So India is not just, none of these people, don't look at all this like the good, the bad. These interests, as long as the interests is aligned, then it's great. When the interests are not aligned, then you have a problem. In this case, the U.S. interests and the Indians' interests are not aligned anymore. He's trying to at least, well, let me make sure I'm aligned with Russia, because it's definitely not with China. And because China is basically decoupling, and we'll talk about it later on. So let me do a quick survey to make sure we're on the same page. Paying $3 a month for bots? Who's buying views? I don't understand what this is about. Let's talk about the issue, right? Let's talk about the issue. So anyway, what's going on with the Alaska Summit? That's exactly what's happening, okay? So basically what we have, therefore, is you have Marco Rubio there. And he's navigating competing GOP factions. Rubio represents a more traditional Republican foreign policy, robust, globally engaged, and alliance-focused. the summit highlights tension within the GOP, because the GOP is saying, are you getting us more involved or less involved? Because we want out. And the GOP, basically, they want to make sure that the MAGA people are taken care of because they want to be reelected. So Rubio's pragmatic posture versus the populist transactional America first wing like Vance keeps everybody happy. So the bottom line is this, okay? The bottom line, hold on, let me address this issue with Devar making. I honestly think there are a lot of other industries except for agriculture, and think tariff imposed by India on India should be removed in some sectors. Yes, the trick with this is a good point, by the way, Devar. The issue, do you see Rubio and JD Vance in the future? I don't know if they're going to be together, but the issue, obviously, with those tariffs is that wouldn't it be nice if we could all get along? Okay, but I think what's happening is because China, and I don't have a good feel for it yet, but basically they are aggressively trying to decouple from everyone else. What I mean by decoupling, China just is building this huge, monstrous 165 billion power plant to sustain to its own needs. It's building right now it owns 45% of the world, of the 45% of shipbuilding capacity in the world. Well, the U.S. is then down to less than 1%. It's conducting heavy-duty operation in the China Sea. They are being very proactive and pushing a lot. They're up to something, right? That's more difficult to understand because it's a different kind of mentality, which I'm not familiar with. But they want to be left alone. They say, you know what? They joined the World Trade Organization in 2000, and since 2000, they have learned and done, and now they learn to do almost everything, and they don't really need anyone. The only thing that they need from the U.S., they need the U.S. consumer. That's the only thing they need from the U.S. at this point, almost everything. So that is what you have to contend with. So basically, at the end of the day, the fact that the presence of Rubio lends diplomatic legitimacy to the Trump-Putin meeting. It promotes a more balanced narrative, one that includes security and allied interests, and it underscores internal GOP balancing. Because at the end of the day, in the background, unseen and very important, is MAGA, the MAGA force, the MAGA people, right? JD's presence in the meeting carries a clear MAGA undertone. I am sure that, probably President said, I got this. I'll take... No. We got to be there, right? Because, frankly, you're taking us somewhere that we may not want to go, right? For example, when the president decided to get involved in bombing Iran, that was a big deal. They didn't like that at all. They say, what if that thing goes sideways? Suppose they reply. Suppose they kill American soldiers. And what do? Now we have another war, and the MAGA people do not want to get into the war. This is extremely important, and I will explain to you why you need the MAGA people. Besides being reelected, you have to realize that this is what this channel is about, and that's why you need to subscribe, is we're monitoring like 11 risks, right? And all of these risks are working right now because, frankly, I wouldn't say unchecked, but the president has a tremendous amount of power behind him. The Democrats are gone because they have no legs to stand on, right? So what's happening is he's able to do all these things. He said 50% on you, 40% on that, 30% on this guy, 20% on that. And frankly, from a legal perspective, technically, you should only use tariffs when there is an emergency. Well, there is an emergency. Why? 50% on Brazil? What is the emergency with Brazil? Because he wants to throw the other president in jail, the former president, my friend. That's not an emergency, right? So right now they try, although they have no leg, they won't be able to do anything. But technically, they're reviewing the tariffs from a law's perspective to say, okay, we got to stop this, right? But frankly, they don't have the power to stop it at this point. They don't, because there's the president, there's the senators and the Republicans, and the Congress, they're all Republicans. So that's not going to work. So then what do? Well, what you do, you wait it out and you see what happens next. But basically, you are going to have a lot of damage down the line. And that's why MAGA is extremely important, because if you lose MAGA, right, if you upset them, then what happens, they won't vote for the Republicans or that Republicans, and they'll vote you out. And if you lose the Republicans, then you lose your power, and then everything comes crumbling down very quickly. And MAGA people is definitely J.D. Vance. Remember, when after Trump bombed, well, not him, but the two bombers went out and did what they did in Iran, there was a report that ran around that basically said, wait a second. Yeah, but we postponed. We didn't destroy everything by a couple of weeks. That's about what we did. And J.D. Vance picked that up and said, yeah, good job, but they're not done. They will come back. And Trump was very upset. So what are you talking about? You're contradicting me in front of these people. Well, no, I'm not contradicting you. There's a report that comes out that actually states that this is not real. That they're not. We don't know if they've been destroyed. So, and because the MAGA people do not want the U.S. to be involved in another war, too many wars. It's not working. And so that's why they're over there, to make sure that, you know what, give Putin what he wants, pull out, stop it. If Europe and Ukraine say, well, no, he's got to go back and say he lost and go home, then that's not going to work. Then you're history. And that's what they're trying to do. They do not want to get involved in a war. And that's why they're there. So basically, remember, what is MAGA? America First framing. Listen, and by the way, MAGA is not just this. No, India, believe it or not, as a MAGA, I'm sure some of the Indian people where there is such a concept. For example, it's not called MAGA, but let me get the right word for you because I want my subscribers to be the most informed as possible. The MAGA people, it is called Swadeshi. It's called the Swadeshi Push. It's an Indian nationalistic economic movement that emphasizes self-reliance, local production, right? Sounds familiar? And reduce dependence on foreign goods and capital. Now, of course, everybody does that. Then nobody does business with anyone. And I don't know if that's a good thing. At the end of the day, we shall see. Swadeshi. Look into it. There is a term. So this is not highly unusual, what they're doing. Anyway, back to MAGA. They have a populist signaling, including Vance, who is more a political firebrand than a career diplomat. It signals to the MAGA base that this meeting is not being conducted in the globalist mold, but rather in terms set by Trump's inner political circle. The optics appeals to voters who see career diplomats and multicultural institutions as part of a deep state, right? We don't want these people talking things we don't understand. We want to relate to these people, and we relate to J.D. Vance. We relate to the president, so we want him to do his thing. Softening toward Russia. MAGA-aligned figures often emphasize pragmatic engagement with Russia. Pragmatic engagement with Russia, do you know what this means? It means let's make sure we don't push him all the way back to Russia, to China. Vance's involvement reinforces the perception that the administration is open to cutting deal with Putin. Oh my God, he's a murderer. He's this, is that. Well, hold on, right? You got to be realistic. It means avoiding further U.S. entanglement abroad. Let's do business together. We don't have to fight, right? Because if you don't talk to Putin, don't forget, the previous administration did not talk to Putin. Did that stop the war in any? They were saying, we're going to... First, what they did is they basically weaponized the dollar against Putin, right? So they took him out. And what does that do? That forced him. That's why you have to be careful that this current administration does not make the same mistake. They basically weaponized the dollar against Putin, pushed Putin even closer to Russia, to China. And in fact, coincidentally enough, if I know this, you could bet that the Chinese president knows that as well, the Chinese premier. And that's the reason why, coincidentally, and this is why I find it's amazing, that this year, May, there were lots of deepening strategic partnership between China and Russia. What the heck are they doing together? Talking and coercing and managing, and the operational collaboration, space collaboration, legal cooperation, strategic partnership. They were doing joint military exercise in the China Sea not too long ago between the Chinese and the Russian Navy. So these are very big topics. What you should worry is, what's in it for me? What do I need to worry about all of what these people are talking about, right? So let's see what happens next, right? But right now, what we're seeing, it is a humongous amount of changes, a humongous amount of situation, and frankly, what is going to happen, okay? So you got all of these elements, 8 elements. Putin, technically speaking, I have to admit, won just by showing up. Just the fact that he's coming in and he's talking and he's allowed to talk to the president. He's head of state. He's not a pariah anymore. The Europeans don't want to see him. But then again, don't forget, he also won for a second reason so far, is that the fact that the Europeans are being kept away from the meeting. I mean, the president could have said, let's bring, I don't know, some Italian president, let's bring some European at the table. And they say, nope, this is between you and I. And people are upset. Well, could you decide on someone else's? That's not what they're doing. They're not there really to talk about Ukraine. They need a reason to talk. They can't just say, we're going to talk about agreement because I want to keep you away from China, right? They can't say that. What they have to say is, I'm here to, because they have to appeal to the population and the people, and people relate to human, they tend to relate to human emotions, right? War, people dying and things like that. These people are not like that. I don't know if any of you are from politics, but politics is about interests. And it's not me saying it. Who said that? Hopefully by now you guys know, but who said that it's all about interests? It is not about enemies. And who said that? It is who said that? Famous quote. Here we go. Nations have no permanent friends or allies. They only have permanent interests. Is it in my interest to do what I do? It is often attributed to Lord Palmerston, who was Britain's foreign secretary. Now, Britain, at some point, they used to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Obviously, now it's very shrunk. They lost India. They lost most of Africa, right? And that's the concern that the current administration has. They're thinking big topic here, right? And they're thinking long term. They're thinking what's going to happen to the U.S. in the future. This is a serious issue. Right now, nobody talks about Britain, right? Although they're trying to be relevant by saying that they would be okay by having all these people come over. I mean, they would put their armies in. They would be okay to have all these armies. They are soldiers in Ukraine to protect the peace, whatever. Let's do a survey because I want to hear what you're thinking. Is JD going to make a difference at the meeting? Let's see if you understand what's going on. The goal. That's right. Not the gal, the goal. 50%. So you're still half and half. So right now, believe it or not, in fact, let me show you. That's the plane is en route to Alaska to talk about what's going on, to talk about the situation there, to make sure that everyone is under the same, all of them are taken off. And obviously, it's going to be very interesting to see they are going to resolve this. But I believe that the fact that you have all these people with them, and Putin also has his people as well. The plane. What movie is that from? George Stevens. The Plane. That's the one. Anyway, yeah, Epstein. Well, you know what, Paul? You brought up Epstein files, right? Why does anyone care about the files? The reason people care about it is because Fantasy Island, that's right. It's a great show. The reason why everyone cares about that is because the MAGA people care about that a lot, right? They care a lot about the fact that the Epstein files, because the Epstein file, be careful. There are lots of parties, lots of things happen everywhere. And everyone is saying, because the idea of MAGA is they don't want this idea of a deep state. You would think that people care so much about it. Yeah. People for years have been asking and clamoring for, I want some clarity. Why do you think YouTube gets more views, right, than all these other networks? Why? Because that is the remaining place where you could actually hear what people really are thinking. And as you could see by your comments, right, people have a lot to say. You say, well, can they just listen to what they... But they're not giving you opinions. They're not giving you information. They're giving you news, right? So, and you could see,